For decades, Burt Lancaster was Hollywood royalty, a charismatic leading man with piercing eyes and a voice that commanded attention. But beyond the red carpets and roaring crowds, there were whispers. Whispers of secrets of hidden romances that never made the headlines. All will be revealed in this video. Do you believe old Hollywood stars kept major secrets from the public? Comment 1 for yes or 0 for no below. From circus tent to cinematic legend. Burt Lancaster was raised in a working-class family in East Harlem, where resilience was a way of life and dreams were often hard-won. His parents, James and Elizabeth Lancaster, worked tirelessly to provide for their children during a time when the country was on the cusp of the Great Depression. Amid the clamor of city streets and the daily realities of working-class life, Lancaster developed a strong sense of discipline, loyalty, and grit, qualities that would later become hallmarks of both the man and the roles he portrayed. As a young boy, Lancaster was not immediately drawn to acting. Instead, he found his first true passion under the big top in the world of the circus. Athletic and fearless. Lancaster trained to become an acrobat, joining the K Brothers Circus in his late teens. There, he honed not just his body, but his presence, learning how to move with grace and power, how to command attention without saying a word. These early experiences in the circus were far more than youthful adventure. They were a crucial foundation for what would later become his distinct cinematic style. His physical agility, the commanding way he held himself on screen, and his willingness to perform his own stunts all stemmed from those early days as an acrobat. But Lancaster's path was not without detours. An injury eventually ended his career in the circus, and for a time he wandered, taking various jobs during the difficult years of the 1930s. He worked as a singing waiter, a salesman, even as a recreation director for the Army during World War II. Still, he held on to a sense that something greater was waiting for him. Something that would allow him to blend the physicality he had mastered with a new form of artistic expression. That opportunity came in the mid-1940s when Hollywood began to notice this tall, strikingly handsome man with broad shoulders and an intense magnetic energy. What first caught the eyes of casting directors was not just his looks, but his undeniable charisma, the kind that didn't have to speak loudly to fill a room. His big break came in 1946 when he was cast as the doomed ex-boxer Ole Swede Anderson in Robert Siodmak's film noir classic The Killers opposite Ava Gardner. The film was an instant success both critically and commercially. Lancaster's performance was nothing short of electrifying. Audiences were captivated by the contrast between his imposing physical presence and the quiet vulnerability he brought to the role. In that debut, he revealed a rare ability to convey both raw strength and aching sadness, often in the same breath. With The Killers, Burt Lancaster didn't just arrive in Hollywood, he exploded onto the scene, signaling the emergence of a new kind of leading man. As his career progressed, Lancaster refused to be pigeonholed. Unlike many actors of his era who stayed within the safety of genre conventions, Lancaster pushed boundaries. He moved seamlessly from hard-edged crime dramas and westerns to romantic epics and powerful social commentaries, tackling each role with intensity and integrity. His background as an acrobat continued to serve him well in physically demanding roles, while his deepening emotional range allowed him to take on complex, often conflicted characters with astonishing depth. What made Lancaster truly stand out was not just his rugged masculinity, but his willingness to explore vulnerability to allow the cracks in a character's armor to show. A star who refused to be tamed by the system. As Burt Lancaster's career evolved through the 1950s, he did something that few major stars of his time dared to attempt. He took creative control of his destiny. At a point when the Hollywood studio system still dictated much of what actors could and couldn't do, Lancaster made the bold decision to step outside its boundaries. Teaming up with producers Harold Hecht and James Hill, he co-founded Hecht Hill Lancaster Productions, a move that would radically redefine what it meant to be a Hollywood actor. More than just a vanity project, the company became a trailblazer in independent filmmaking, producing films that weren't just commercially viable but also socially conscious, character-driven, and deeply human. Lancaster used his influence not to churn out formulaic hits but to explore stories that mattered, often giving voice to characters and themes overlooked by mainstream studios. One of the earliest and most significant results of this venture was Marty, a quiet, emotionally resonant film about a lonely Bronx butcher looking for love. Written by Paddy Chayefsky and starring Ernest Borgnine, the film was a revelation. It shattered expectations with its low-budget simplicity and heartfelt realism, and it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, a stunning achievement for an independently produced drama in a sea of big-budget spectacles. Marty proved that stories grounded in everyday life could still be deeply cinematic. Lancaster's company continued to produce ambitious films like Separate Tables, a sensitive, ensemble-driven drama that tackled themes of loneliness, repression, and social conformity with remarkable maturity. These projects demonstrated Lancaster's commitment to storytelling that looked beneath the surface to the vulnerable, conflicted parts of the human experience. Lancaster himself wasn't content to let his legacy rest solely on the strength of his production company. As an actor, he continued to pursue roles that challenged him both artistically and morally. His performance in Elmer Gantry, for which he won his first Academy Award, marked a turning point in his career. Portraying a traveling salesman turned charismatic evangelist, Lancaster walked a tightrope between fiery conviction and dangerous manipulation. The role demanded seduction, soul-searching, and swagger, and Lancaster delivered with an energy that was as ferocious as it was nuanced. Just 2 years later, in Birdman of Alcatraz, Lancaster transformed yet again, this time into Robert Stroud, a hardened inmate whose fascination with birds led to a lifetime of self-education and unexpected redemption. The film offered no easy answers, and neither did Lancaster's performance. He imbued Stroud with a quiet dignity and a palpable inner torment, earning a second Oscar nomination and affirming his status as a master of portraying flawed, deeply human characters. His talent lay not just in embodying these roles but in elevating them, turning men who might have been dismissed as villains or oddities into portraits of complexity and grace. Yet Lancaster's legacy wasn't confined to the screen. Off-camera, he was a man of conviction and conscience, never afraid to speak out even when it came at personal or professional cost. At a time when many in Hollywood preferred to play it safe, Lancaster became one of the industry's most vocal advocates for civil rights, lending his name, presence, and influence to causes that mattered. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., supported racial equality labor unions and the freedom of artistic expression, and spoke out against McCarthyism during a politically volatile era. He didn't just participate in movements, he stood firm when it counted. Whether supporting the NAACP, defending blacklisted colleagues, or opposing censorship, Lancaster wielded his fame not as a shield, but as a tool to illuminate injustices and encourage change. For him, celebrity was not a cloak to hide behind, but a platform to challenge the world to be better. Even as he aged, Lancaster refused to be relegated to the sidelines. The 1960s and 70s saw a shift in Hollywood, with younger stars rising and the studio system giving way to new creative voices. But Lancaster adapted. Far from clinging to past glories, he leaned into his maturity, taking on roles that reflected the passage of time and the wear of experience. In The Swimmer, he played a man drifting through a surreal suburban landscape, emotionally unraveling as he attempts to swim his way home through his neighbors' backyard pools. The film was psychologically rich, haunting, and abstract, very different from the work that had made him famous. Though initially misunderstood, The Swimmer gained a devoted following and is now considered one of Lancaster's boldest and most personal films. Then came Atlantic City, a quiet, elegiac story about faded dreams and new beginnings. In it, Lancaster portrayed Lou Pascal, an aging, small-time gangster clinging to memories of grandeur in a decaying seaside town. The role earned him yet another Academy Award nomination and proved once again that Lancaster could tap into melancholy grace and fragility without losing the magnetism that had defined his career for decades. Even as his health declined in the late 1980s, Lancaster remained a towering figure and icon, not because he played heroes, but because he understood the humanity inside them. His journey from street kid to circus performer, from matinee idol to passionate activist, was not a straight line but a path carved through sheer will, talent, and vision. First marriage, a tangle of love, acrobatics, and ambition. Beyond the glow of Hollywood lights and the commanding performances that defined his on-screen career, Burt Lancaster's personal life unfolded in quieter, more complex shades, a blend of passion, artistic connection, and emotional turbulence. Over the course of his life, Lancaster would marry 3 times and father 5 children. Each relationship revealed a different facet of the man behind the screen idol, his longing for stability, his commitment to family, and his restlessness as both an artist and a partner. His first marriage to June Ernst was particularly formative not only personally but professionally. Long before he was a movie star, Lancaster was a young man with boundless physical energy and dreams not yet fully formed. It was during these early years in the 1930s that he met June, a fellow performer whose life and lineage were inseparable from the world of circus artistry. June Ernst wasn't just a circus performer, she was born into a family of legendary aerialists, a legacy of daring and performance that went back generations. Her mother, a renowned trapeze artist in her own right, had blazed trails in a world that often overlooked the contributions of women in physical performance. June inherited that same fearless spirit. With elegance and command, she had already carved out her own name under the big top by the time she and Burt met. Their connection was immediate, rooted in shared experiences of disciplined performance and a love for the physical demands of acrobatics. When Lancaster married June, he didn't just join her in marriage, he joined her world. Immersed in the rigors of circus life, Burt trained, performed, and traveled alongside June and her family. It was during this time that he developed the remarkable physical prowess and control that would later make him stand out in Hollywood, distinguishing him from other actors with his ability to do his own stunts and bring a raw physicality to roles that required more than just charm. This period in Burt's life shaped not just his body, but also his disciplined showmanship and love for ensemble performance traits that would serve him well in the film industry. In many ways, June and the world she came from offered him his first stage, albeit under the canvas of a circus tent rather than a Hollywood soundstage. But even with their mutual dedication to craft and performance, their marriage would not endure. As Lancaster's ambitions shifted from the circus to more stable work and eventually toward the stage, and screen cracks began to form. The transient nature of circus life, paired with the increasing pressures of finding his place in the world, began to pull them in different directions. Though they had once leapt together under the trapeze, trusting each other mid-air, that metaphorical trust did not hold on solid ground. They separated sometime in the late 1930s. Yet, just as Lancaster's Hollywood star was beginning to rise, the official dissolution of the marriage remained surrounded by uncertainty. Some early media reports listed the divorce as finalized in 1940, but deeper biographical research and personal accounts have suggested that it might not have been legally concluded until as late as 1946. This ambiguity has created confusion among biographers and fans alike, particularly when trying to reconcile the timeline of Lancaster's later relationships, including the beginning of his second marriage. A marriage of passion and purpose. Burt Lancaster's second marriage to Norma Anderson emerged from the unlikeliest of settings, the ravages and restlessness of World War II. In a time defined by upheaval and displacement, their story began with a chance encounter sparked not by the bright lights of Hollywood, but by the fading twilight of wartime Italy. Norma Louise Anderson, born in 1917, was not a woman seeking fame or fortune. She had been working as a stenographer, modest and efficient, when she was called upon to step into an unexpected role. An actress in a USO production created to boost the morale of American troops overseas had fallen ill, and Norma volunteered to take her place. It was a bold move, one that would not only alter the lives of soldiers momentarily lifted by laughter and music, but one that would also change the course of Norma's own life forever. As she arrived in town from the airport, peering out from the window of a military vehicle, she caught sight of a tall, striking officer, Burt Lancaster. With his lean, athletic build and quietly commanding presence, he stood out even in a crowd of soldiers. Captivated at first glance, Norma turned to a nearby officer and asked the now famous question, "Who is that good-looking officer, and is he married?" The officer, amused and quick to act, arranged a blind date that very evening. What followed was a connection grounded in charm and chemistry, but also a shared seriousness of purpose. The two were married in 1946, not long after Lancaster returned to the States and began his meteoric rise in Hollywood. As his film career took off, Norma became his partner not just in family life, but in thought politics and principle. Norma Anderson was not content to play the part of a passive Hollywood wife. She was deeply committed to activism and social progress, and her passion became a defining force within their home. The couple's house in Bel Air, though nestled among the manicured lawns and gated estates of the entertainment elite, contained a room that told a different story. A fully equipped workspace dedicated to political organizing. Printing presses, stacks of flyers, and mailing materials filled the room, which Norma used to support the causes closest to her heart, chief among them her work with the League of Women Voters. Her activism extended beyond education and voter empowerment. Norma was a lifelong member of the NAACP, and together with Burt, she stood on the front lines of America's civil rights movement. In a time when many in Hollywood chose silence for the sake of their careers, Burt and Norma chose action. In the early 1960s, the couple organized and hosted a fundraiser to support Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a daring public stand just ahead of the historic 1963 March on Washington. It was a moment that revealed the depth of their commitment not only to each other but to the values they held dear: justice, equality, and human dignity. Together, Burt and Norma had 5 children, forming a large and lively family. Their son, Bill Lancaster, would go on to become a talented screenwriter, known for his work on The Bad News Bears and the cult horror classic The Thing. Their daughters, Susan Joanna and Sheila, spelled Siegel but pronounced Sheila, each carried elements of their parents' creativity and conscience into their own lives, with Joanna later working as a film producer. Their other son, James, kept a lower profile but remained close to the family throughout their shared journey. Despite these accomplishments and shared ideals, the marriage between Burt and Norma was not immune to the pressures and complexities of fame. As Lancaster's star continued to rise in Hollywood and his work often took him across continents and through emotionally demanding roles, the weight of his professional life placed increasing strain on his personal one. Behind closed doors, their partnership faced deep and painful challenges. Arguments, intensified communication broke down, and the emotional gap between them grew wider with each passing year. By 1966, Burt and Norma had separated. The emotional toll of maintaining a public image of harmony while privately unraveling proved too much. Their divorce was finalized in 1969, closing a chapter that had begun with such promise and passion. The last marriage. During the time that Burt Lancaster was in the process of dissolving his second marriage, he began a long-term relationship with Jackie Bone, a hairdresser who worked on the set of the film The Professionals, which was one of Lancaster's main undertakings during the late 1960s and early 1970s. This relationship was characterized by a high degree of instability. Intensity and drama were hallmarks of their relationships with one another. During a dinner party that was attended by significant players in the business such as director Sidney Pollack and actor Peter Falk Bone was responsible for a particularly memorable event in which he smashed a wine bottle over Lancaster's head. During this episode, the passionate yet frequently turbulent nature of their relationship was brought to light. As a result of Jackie Bone's decision to undergo a religious spiritual transformation, their relationship ultimately came to an end. According to reports, Lancaster, a guy with a wide range of ideas and personal values, was unable to reconcile their divergent spiritual paths, which ultimately led to the breakdown of their relationship. During the latter part of his life, Burt Lancaster tied the knot with Susan Martin in September of 1990, marking his third and last marriage. This relationship was significantly different from his other unions in that it was more private and garnered less attention from the public. Lancaster was able to have company throughout his latter years because of this relationship, which continued until his death in 1994. Lancaster was struggling with health issues and reflecting on a long and famous career at the time when Susan Martin was his companion. At this time, he was also reflecting on his career. Hidden Truth. Love, Secrecy, and Longing in Hollywood's Golden Age. In the final years of his remarkable life, Burt Lancaster, once the embodiment of Hollywood masculinity with his powerful frame and smoldering on-screen intensity, began to open up to those closest to him about a deeply private and unexpected part of his story. Behind the blinding lights of stardom and the thunder of applause that had followed him for decades, Lancaster harbored a past defined not just by cinematic milestones, but by tender secret loves shared with other men. Fellow legends who, like him, lived behind carefully constructed facades. In an era when even a whisper of homosexuality could destroy a career overnight, Lancaster's world was one of constant vigilance. The pressures of masculinity in the 1940s and 1950s film industry were immense, especially for someone like Lancaster, who had been cast as everything from a bare-knuckled boxer to a steely-eyed cowboy to a smoldering romantic lead. Yet, beyond the reach of the cameras, his personal life unfolded in shadows and silences where affection and identity had to be carefully disguised. Among the most poignant and profound of these entanglements was his connection with Cary Grant, a man every bit as iconic, elegant, and enigmatic as the silver screen ever produced. Grant, born Archibald Leach, had long been a subject of quiet speculation, having lived for many years with actor Randolph Scott in a famously intimate domestic partnership. Though the studios relentlessly crafted a playboy image around Grant, whispers of his private life persisted obscured by time and tinsel. Lancaster and Grant crossed paths at an industry gala in the late 1940s, a time when both men were rising into the upper echelon of Hollywood royalty. Grant, polished and poised in a tailored suit, exuded an effortless charisma. Lancaster, with his intense gaze and quietly rebellious spirit, was drawn to him immediately. According to confidants, their eyes locked across the room, and an unspoken understanding passed between them, one of mutual recognition, loneliness, and curiosity. What began as brief, polite conversations soon deepened into something far more intimate. Their relationship, described by Lancaster years later in private recollections as electric delicate and ultimately doomed, unfolded in borrowed hours and hushed escapes along California's Pacific Coast Highway, where secluded beach houses offered rare moments of safety and serenity. In these private spaces, far from the prying eyes of the tabloids and studio fixers, the two men shed their personas, embracing a connection built on shared vulnerability and emotional complexity. Yet, despite the depth of their bond, the fear that haunted Cary Grant was always just beneath the surface. His entire career had been constructed on a finely balanced image of suave heterosexuality, and he was acutely aware of what he stood to lose. Lancaster, for his part, was more daring, even defiant by nature, but he understood and respected Grant's terror. The world they inhabited was one where one wrong headline, one vindictive whisper could unravel everything. Their romance, while profound, was also fragile and finite. Eventually, the pressures became too great. Grant, ever cautious, began to pull away, slipping further behind his fortress of privacy. Lancaster, though heartbroken, accepted the quiet end. He walked back into his life like an actor exiting the stage, Lancaster reportedly said, and the curtain never lifted again. What remains of that relationship is mostly memory, locked away in the hearts of a few trusted friends, and written between the lines of the personal correspondence and fading photographs. Lancaster's assertion that he had a brief and peculiar fascination with J. Edgar Hoover, the notorious head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who had enormous political and cultural authority throughout the middle of the 20th century, was perhaps the most stunning of all. Hoover, who was never married and was sometimes speculated to have had a long-term relationship with his assistant, Clyde Tolson, was not an actor but maintained significant links to Hollywood through his influence over media representations of law enforcement and morals. Hoover was also famous for his accomplishments in the field of public administration. When Lancaster was attending a high society charity banquet in Washington District of Columbia, he recalled meeting Hoover through common contacts. Despite the fact that their relationship was not romantic in the traditional sense, it was fraught with power dynamics and a sense of secrecy. In his description of Hoover, Lancaster described him as a man who was desperate for closeness yet scared of his own reflection. Despite the fact that the link was extremely unnerving, it provided Lancaster with a one-of-a-kind opportunity to get insight into the thinking of one of the most mysterious figures in the history of American politics. Rock Hudson, who was tall, attractive, and virile, became one of the most emotionally intense relationships that Lancaster had. He was the epitome of the leading man. The two of them first met on the set of a movie that was being made in the early 1950s, and their relationship developed during the height of Hudson's celebrity. As a result of the fact that he was under the rigorous supervision of studio managers, Hudson lived in constant terror of being outed. This fear was eventually tragically fulfilled following his death from AIDS in 1985, which compelled the public to confront the reality that he had concealed for decades. Hudson was recalled by Lancaster as a kind-hearted individual who possessed the body of a gladiator. He was someone who yearned for love, but believed that it would never be within their grasp. Long car excursions across the desert were a vital part of their relationship. These travels took them away from the paparazzi and allowed them to breathe freely, even if it was just for a weekend. It was not a lack of affection between Lancaster and Hudson that caused their relationship to deteriorate. Rather, it was the impossibility of permanency in a world that needed denial. Lancaster recognized Hudson's need for prudence. The most surprising name on Lancaster's list was Ricky Nelson, the adolescent idol and television star from the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Nelson is known for his impeccable appearances on television. During the early 1960s, Nelson, who was over 20 years younger than Lancaster, allegedly had a brief and turbulent romance with the elder actor. This story is said to have occurred during the time period. While Nelson was still in the process of transitioning from a kid performer to an adult artist, Lancaster had already established himself as a seasoned star at that point. Despite the fact that it was only a short-term connection, Nelson found Lancaster to be both a guide and a protector. This relationship was extremely significant to Nelson. On the other hand, Lancaster was aware of the imbalance and decided to stop it in a gentle manner. He was of the opinion that Ricky required space in order to discover his own identity both professionally and emotionally, respectively. He recalled Nelson with a great deal of affection, referring to him as the young lad who sang like a wind and loved with the desire of someone who had never been let to want. Last but not least, there was Marlon Brando, who was maybe the most difficult and brilliant character on Lancaster's list. Not only was Brando impetuous and erratic, but he was also blatantly rebellious. Lancaster was not of these qualities. According to Lancaster's perspective, their relationship was in a state of violent eruption. While attending a politically charged event in Hollywood in the late 1950s, they came face to face with one another, and the chemistry that they had was quick, unrestrained, and unfiltered. Brando, who was known for his sexual flexibility and rejection of convention, lured Lancaster in with intellectual arguments, intriguing challenges, and a sensuality that was difficult to refuse. Lancaster was unable to resist Brando's seductive seduction. Ego, creative competition, and a shared desire to dominate one another to the point of emotional and physical dominance all contributed to the disorder that characterized their partnership. Lancaster referred to Brando as the only man I have ever encountered who has the ability to make me feel absolutely undone simply by looking at me. The weight of secrecy, along with the fact that their personalities were in direct opposition to one another, was the only thing that caused their affair to end after it had been going on and off for a number of years. Each of these connections, which were kept concealed from the general public, were responsible for painting a very different picture of Burt Lancaster than the one that was shown on film. Underneath the image of the swashbuckling hero and rugged leading man was a guy who had loved sincerely, sometimes dangerously, and always in silence. He had loved without words being said. By releasing these identities at a later stage in his life, Lancaster was not looking for sensationalism. Rather, he was seeking emancipation from decades of pretending guarding and denying a reality that defined him just as much as any film character ever did. Keep secrets till the death. Burt Lancaster passed away in 1994, taking many secrets to the grave. But the clues he left behind suggest his heart was far more complex and far more courageous than the studios ever let on. After suffering a third heart attack at 4:50 in the morning on October 20th, 1994, Lancaster passed away in his residence in Century City, which is located in the city of Los Angeles. His corpse was burned, and his ashes were dispersed beneath a great oak tree in Westwood Memorial Park, which is situated in Westwood Village, California. His body was cremated. The area is marked with a modest square-ground plaque that is surrounded by numerous others and bears the inscription Burt Lancaster, 1913 to 1994. In accordance with his wishes, there was neither a monument nor a burial service given in his honor. What do you think Burt Lancaster was trying to protect? Was it love image or something deeper? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you were moved by this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more Hollywood Untold stories. Because behind every legend is a truth waiting to be uncovered.